Hey, what's up? Hello, welcome to the first of many Fire Emblem Engage tier list videos that I'll be making. I'm Mecha, and this is going to be a tier list of my first impressions of Fire Emblem Engage. It's not meant to be the definitive Omega-brained, super accurate down to precision list thing that you're probably hoping for, because I don't have enough experience with the game yet to give you that kind of stuff. Instead, this is meant to be a bit of a snapshot of my opinions right now, and maybe at some point it will be fun to revisit this kind of video and see what has changed once I get better at the game, once I've played maddening mode, once I've watched some other people play some more, discuss the units more. Right now this is just based off of the units I've used, the units I've seen other people use, the things I've seen people discuss. A little bit of theory and a little bit of practical knowledge, but again, the game is still young, meta-wise, so a lot can change. At this point, I have almost completed my first playthrough. I only have the final chapter left as I'm recording this, but I did do everything beforehand. I did all the story chapters, all the paralogs, and I didn't do any grinding, any skirmishes. I did like one or two to like see what they were, but no trying to get like max gold with Anna or anything like that. The first portion of this video will be completely spoiler-free. I'll put timestamps and a spoiler warning once you do get into spoiler territory. But right now, what you're seeing is spoiler-free, and you can keep listening as long as you don't want any spoilers, generally speaking. But once there will be spoilers, there'll be a warning. I'm not going to be tiering the engage rings. They're technically on this tier list maker as well. Just you can tier like Marth and Ike and Roy and friends if you want to, but I won't be doing that here. I'll take them into account obviously because they're such a huge part of what makes characters work on the battlefield, but I will not tier the actual engage rings, just the characters that can use them. Now, I don't know everything about every character, not even close, and that's why for this tier list I'm going to split them into two groups, like this. There's one group of people that I have used and units that I have not used. It's not exactly as black and white as that. The former are units that I've fielded for many chapters after they joined. Basically, they are people who are or were a part of my team for a significant amount of time. And the rest, the bottom part, they're units that I have only used when I had no other alternatives, like in the early game, or units that I used for maybe a couple chapters in the mid game or late game, then I benched them. So that way you'll know what my impressions are based on. The game gives you a lot of customization in the form of emblem rings, weapon forging, reclassing, etc. So if I put a unit in a lower position than you might expect based off your or someone else's experience, then it might just be because I made different choices than you or other people, and I might not have used the unit as much as you did. So for the bottom part, for the have not used tier or group, I'm going to go off of other people's impressions and my like rough impressions for like the little time that I used them, but not, super long term. Whereas the top part were all part of my core team for a while, so I know a little bit more about them and how they functioned, although I still only have experience using them with like a couple emblem rings maybe, and some of them I even benched somewhere along the way. And again, it was my first playthrough, it was nowhere near optimized, so it's possible I did something stupid that made the units worse, or I did something that you didn't consider that made them better, that the reverse is possible too. So in the end, it's just supposed to be my current impression of the units in the game, nothing more, nothing less. It's just a snapshot, and maybe at some point I'll come up with like a better engaged tier list, maybe like a collaboration, stuff like that. But right now, let's get into it. I'll try to be brief for every character because again, in-depth analysis is kind of hard when you only have a one-dimensional view of every character. So for the first group, the have used characters, I'll go for what I did with the characters, how they performed, how they've been doing, what they were doing when they were doing things. Basically, how they performed in my playthrough, and I'll try to correct for things I've heard that were like unusual or things I could have done, things I heard later that I could do, or different builds, stuff like that, as applicable. So we'll start with Alear and work our way left to right. Hard mode is, by the way, not fixed growths, it's random growth, and with Alear there's no character that shows it better than others, because Alear is horribly RNG screwed in my playthroughs. Particularly his strength was super awful. I think in the early game I was complaining he got 2 strength in his first, what was it, like 14 level ups or something. He eventually started catching up, but for the most part his combat was pretty awful. I say him because I use male Alear. I think pretty much everything I say about male Alear also applies to female Alear, barring some personal skill interactions, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Pretty sure they're going to end up in the same position if I were to tier both male and female Alear. But yeah, my Alear was pretty crappy. Not going to be apologetic about it. I used him with Marth in the early game, obviously, and then I tried out some other things. I think I had Sigurd on him for a little bit. like maybe one chapter to see if I could like canter in a different position and then use his personal to my advantage. That was pretty fun. I know Alir can be pretty good. I kept him in his dragon class because the dragon class, like the subclass properties, were very helpful. Particularly, I found that he got really useful once I got Byleth on him, because he can basically do a rally spectrum of sorts. He can rally like 3 stats at one, or not 3 stats. He can give +3 to pretty much all your stats, like strength, speed, dex, luck, etc. And I found that super helpful to have around, so I used Alir for that for most of the part. So yeah, that's... And then once he got Byleth on him and used Dance to the Goddess, obviously became more useful. It was more Byleth and the Dragon class being useful than Alir themselves being useful. And in the end of the game, you know, Alir gets a bit of a boost. Again, spoiler free, but that helped me a little bit in my impression of him. But I still have the rest of the game in mind to tier him. I feel like Alir's decent, not great. I guess usually I don't mark my tiers like this with like flawless, near flawless, decent, useful. But just to give a bit of context what I mean with this, like these are units that are just really, really good. Nothing wrong with them. Basically, they're the best units in the game. A is units that are like nearly as good, but not quite, because they have like 1 or 2 bad things about them that kind of hold them back, but generally they're really good. B units are decent, but you know, they have some bigger problems that hold them back. And C units are usable, that are basically, some would call them bad units. I think this game doesn't have bad units in the sense that no one is irredeemable. You can... Some of the emblem rings you can put on people will just basically salvage them completely and make them usable. And we'll have an example of that in just a moment. I don't think anyone in this game is really bad. You could argue some people are bad, like in comparison, right? But generally speaking, no one is bad enough to be in D tier, at least for these impressions right now. I think everyone in this game is usable with enough resources put into them. And you get so many resources that it's kind of hard not to do that with at least 1 or 2 units in your playthrough. So that's why I'm going with a 4-tier system of just S, A, B, and C. That doesn't mean that this is objectively correct. This is just the way I'm doing it right now. Anyway, I think Alir is decent, but not fantastic. Even with like 2 more strength on my Alir in the early game, I still don't think I would have a very good impression of him. He wasn't doubling anything, and my speed was pretty much dead on average as far as I recall. Maybe, I don't think the end game performance puts him in like A rank. For most of the game, Alir is not the best combat unit you have, and he doesn't really provide any other utility, and neither does he like have any affinities for staff utility or anything like that. So that's why I'm putting him in B decent. I do think the dragon properties are pretty good. I haven't experimented a whole lot with that. I put Corn on him for 1 map to do like, you can summon like 9 different types of terrain. Stuff like that I can definitely experiment more with, and it would be very interesting to do so. And maybe it would make Alir better than what I'm giving him right now. But right now, I think my impression is B. Next up is ATA. Now, if you watch my Let's Play, you know I love ATA. I used her for pretty much the whole game, and I know that part of that is because I put Lyn on her for most of the chapters. I had some experimentation in the early game with other emblems on her. I used Sigurd for her once, but for most of the part, I gave her Lyn. And when you put Lyn on someone, they turn out pretty good. They get Speed Taker, Alacrity, Astral Storm. ATA was an archer for a lot of the time. I think Sniper as well, so that means extra range with Astral Storm. At some point I changed her to Warrior and still kept Lyn on her, which meant that she got more chain attacks in, with the longbow especially. ATA is one of the few people who can become a warrior, but then still have B bows for longbows. I think that's what it is. Maybe it's C bows. But either way, it's a pretty unique trait that she has that few other people have as a warrior. Gave her some chain attack options. Also made her strength pretty massive. She ended up leveling to 20 and then looping back to level 1 and still getting pretty far in the experience curve. I used ATA a lot, but that's just kind of what happens with Lyn units. Just kind of snowball thanks to Speed Taker. So ATA was very good for me, but if I were to be objective and rank her among other characters, I don't think she'd be better than Alir. I think she goes into C, usable tier. She's fun, and the fact that she was so easy to make good by just putting an emblem ring on her, I think showcases what I was talking about earlier when I said you can make all units good. So that's why I'm not putting her in like a lower tier than this, because in the end, this is what she felt like, a usable character that was pretty easy to make good. I don't think I even gave that many stat boosters to her. I gave her the boots in the late game, and that's pretty much it. I don't recall giving any stat boosters to AT. Maybe I'm wrong though. Maybe I did give her something in the early game, I just forgot. You could probably also just stay Sniper, use the Covert class. I think Covert is better for thieves because they can actually counter at once range. They can make use of the avoid bonus more, but there's probably some situations where being covert as a sniper can come in handy. You can bait like a bunch of 2-range enemies and kill them that way. Or you can use the minibow. I don't know. There's probably more possibilities with AT I'm not thinking of, but that's the way I used her as a warrior, dual strike machine, Lynn, speed taker, murder everything, kill every boss, be very good. AT is great. Saline is the first unit that I've used, that I was planning on using for basically the whole game, and ended up benching because they just weren't really doing anything, and I wanted to try some different units on my first playthrough. The main factor in that being her movement. But in the early game, I thought she was quite good. I kept Celica on her, as I think most people did, because it just made sense. It's the canonical combination, and Mystical gives an extra quality, I think, with Ragnarok and Warp Ragnarok. You get like 20% extra damage, stuff like that. It's pretty good. And yeah, that was pretty decent performance, and she kind of kept that up. I think mine even got like blessed in speed or magic, one of the two stats that have made her like better than for most people's, and that was fine. But there was just a point in the game where she was just kind of trucking along, not having enough movement to keep up with other units that were promoting and getting more move. I did promote her, like in fact she was one of the first people to reach, like she reached like level 15 promoted, which is pretty high. But other than like using an occasional physics staff, there just wasn't much she was doing in terms of combat and everything. That's probably partially my fault. It doesn't really help that you don't have access to Celica the whole game long, and so it makes it harder to keep up with a unit that was usually using Warp Ragnarok to keep up. Maybe that was part of the problem. But yeah, in the end I thought she was fine, but she had some issues, and from what I can tell, someone like Citrine, for example, is more fun to use because her stats are more lopsided, so you can do more funny things with her. I feel like Saline is okay. Also, part of what hurt me with the early units probably is that I was like pretty happily inheriting skills just to try it out. So for example, I inherited Stat's favorite food ability that I know was like supposed to be pretty good, but I didn't get a whole lot of mileage out of it because I kept forgetting it. But that was like, I was down some SP. Basically, early experimentation with the SP system went on Louise and Saline. That probably didn't help them too much. She was fine, but I'm going to put her in B and D since she'll probably end up with some people between the two. She was fine. Louise, I really enjoyed using Louise in the early game, and I thought at first he'd be basically the best armor knight in the series since Oswin because the properties worked out so well in the early game. Getting broken was a serious problem. Not having enough bulk was a serious problem because in the early game, who can really take hits, right? It's Louise, Vander, and List, kind of. Everyone else is a little fragile. Can take 1 or 2 hits. I'm pretty sure this is the same on Maddening, but even on hard, chapters like Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 were pretty rough, and Louise would carry a big portion of the load. So I used him for that. I heard he was going to fall off, and I was planning on keeping on using him despite it, because I just wanted to see it for myself. And there were parts where he's still being useful being a tank. I promoted him to Great Knight, so he could keep up better with the movement on enemies. That does lose the getting broken effect from his subclass, because he becomes a cavalry instead of armored. And that was a bit unfortunate, but I generally am able to manipulate the weapon triangle in situation fine to where being broken isn't much of a problem. But there were 2 problems with this. One is that the ability to take hits becomes less valuable as you get other units that can take hits, especially when you get other units that, and this is the second problem with Louise, his offense wasn't very good for me. He generally would not double, and sometimes enemies would double him, and there'd be more mages mixed into the enemy types, and I just didn't have enough weapons to compensate for that. What I tried doing is giving him, I think, the Ike Engraved Killer Axe to go for some one-shots instead. And the moment I decided to bench Louise was the moment he, like, I think it was an Erica paralogue where he fought like a halberdier with that Killer Axe and he crit that he didn't even kill. That was when I said, yeah, I should try some other units. We should see other people, Louise. I'm sorry. That was what I went for. In hindsight, there were other things I could have done to make Louise better. One idea I got from one of my Patreons, P. Vladios, was trying to make a one-shot instead with like a forged, I think it was a silver great lance or something, and just Ike engrave that or Roy engrave that, and then just do massive damage in one hit. That could have been one way to solve it. Another one could be like a brave weapon. That can also work. So those are ideas that I definitely want to try if I'm using Louise again. As is, I think Louise was overall more useful for me still. Like, I think he's better than Alir overall. But again, I thought Louise was really good in the early game and my Alir was really bad. So maybe I'm copium here. It's possible that it's the other way around, but I feel like Louise is at least decent. If it was just based off his early game impressions, he'd definitely be an 8-0. And maybe if he's like better in the late game than I'm seeing right now, then maybe he does belong in A. But right now I'm going to put him in B. I might do some like later corrections. Chloe, I think very early on, was called one of the best units in the game. Not entirely sure about that, but I know she's really, really good. I am biased because I put Sigurd on her for most of the game. I had some Sigurd Louise parts, but for the most part it's just Chloe. Momentum just works really well on a flyer, getting a lot of extra damage in. Her speed is really high. You get several energy drops in the early game, so even though her strength isn't the best, it's very easy to compensate for. and it's easier to fix a strength problem than a speed problem because you don't get many speed wings. And I mean, you can kind of help strength as well using like forges, whereas for speed, you kind of just don't have many options like that. So that's really good. I know 11 sword Chloe's really good. I didn't use that a whole lot. I think my Chloe had, I think she was strength blessed by a little bit as well. The energy drops aren't hurting either. So I never really needed 11 sword, but I know from other people that that's a really good combo for her because her magic is close enough to her strength to where the 11 sword ends up doing more damage because the enemy resistance is lower. And just flying is really nice in this game. There's a lot of terrain to go around. Cancer on Sigurd really helps, of course. But again, because I had Sigurd, one of the best emblems on her, it's really hard to estimate how good she would be without it and if she's actually the best user of it. She probably is, but it's a little unfair to compare Chloe to people that aren't using Sigurd. That's what I was doing the most of the run, is using Sigurd on Chloe and other people on other people. So that's how it went for me. I don't think she's flawless because she definitely has some strength issues, some bulk issues, weakness to bows, needs Sigurd to be at her absolute best. So I'm going to plop her in A right now, and I'm going to get rid of these things at the bottom because they look ugly and mess up my overlay. But I think Chloe's fine. I just don't think she's perfect, but she's really good. Next is Yunaka, a fan favorite. I loved using Yunaka, and I thought I'd be using her all game when I first got her because she was able to just make enemies have 0 hit on you when I first got her, and I thought that was so impressive that I thought I'd be using her all game long. Just covert plus daggers is really good. Daggers getting +2 might with every time you forge them is insane. Applying poison is really nice. It sets up kills for others so well, especially on bosses, but even on like random enemies. There was a chapter where I got a trick from someone else, from Raisins, that was like, well, I used Celica on Yunaka and just warped her into a terrain tile in the middle of a bunch of enemies and then just cleaned them up by herself. That was pretty good. 30 crit from her personal. This is one of the best personals in the game, maybe even the best. Just getting 30 crit is really good. The reason I bench Yunaka is simply because I got Zelkov, and my Yunaka didn't get a whole lot of strength. It was weird because I think mine felt like she was getting strength less, but she still was like 6 strength behind Zelkov when Zelkov joined. And I didn't feel like I needed 2 of that same unit type. Sometimes a unit type is so good that you can use 2, but in the case of Zelkov and Yunaka, I already was like liking in deployment slots, and they both kind of do the same thing. And I ended up going with Zelkov because his stats were just all around better when he joined. No real flaws with Yunaka. I know some people who have used her all game long and were pretty satisfied. In my case, that wasn't really in the cards, and I did want to try as many uses as possible, so I did use Yunaka all game long. But I do appreciate her power. That said, because of my experience with using Zelkov, I did notice some problems with the Thief covert tricks in the late game. Similar to Louise, or I think I'm supposed to say Louis, being able to just survive enemies by itself is not the biggest boon ever, especially if the enemy also has ways to kill you despite having like almost no hit. Things like chain attacks tend to do Louise in sometimes. That can also be a weakness of Yunaka until you get Corrin, until you get pair up to make sure she cannot get chain attacks. Magic from mysticals can hit her. Status stabs like Entrap can mess up your plans. There's a couple of other ways that just having a bunch of avoid alone is not enough to survive. And also sometimes enemies would just take so little damage from her that she was actually wasting our time. That said, there were still a bunch of chapters in the mid-game where just having Zelkov use the fog machine, as I call it, to distract like 5 enemies at once was helpful. So I don't want to say she's bad. I'm not sure whether to put her in A or B. I'm pretty sure she goes below Zelkov. I'm just not sure if she's A or B herself. Let's just go with A for now. I would definitely recommend using Yunaka for like at least the time you have her for, because she is one of the better units you have at that point. You don't have many alternatives to her. And there's just a lot of ways she can set up kills with the daggers and the poison, and the terrain keeps her alive. This distracts like a massive bunch of enemies by herself. It's super, super nice. So she's not bad. In fact, of course she's not bad. She's near flawless, as it says. But it's possible she should be in B as well. Diamant is one of the units that I've used the most throughout the entire run. I started using him with Roy because the game kind of forces that on you. But at some point I put Ike on him and I just never really looked back. And that's a bit of a problem because that's mostly making me look at Diamant through the lens of just using Ike a lot of the time. And Ike provides a lot to a unit when it comes to combat. He adds so much durability that it's hard to gauge exactly how useful Diamant would be without putting Ike on him. Just having Ragnell, Irvin, half the damage when he's engaged, and then the +5 defense res when you're using Great Ether. or Great Aether. All these factors are hard to ignore when you have them in play. It's really hard for me to look at my Diamant's performance and say, well, this is how you would have done without Ike. That said, his personal class, his promoted class has Soul. That's a good ability to have. It's not something you want to rely on. Like, you don't want to say, okay, go in here, hopefully get Soul and survive, because that's often going to make you just, you know, turn wheel back or time crystal back afterwards, if you have to do that. But if it's between like, okay, I need to soul or I need to dodge like 1 out of 4 hits, that's pretty reasonable, right? So it's basically an avoid boost is the way I like to think of soul. The class also has some problems, like a low dexterity cap of 22, so Diamantis ends up missing quite a few times, when that's kind of annoying. But usually he's worth his weight in gold anyway, just because he would just fight like 5,000 enemies. Again, mostly thanks to Ike. That said, his bases aren't so good that he's like amazing right out the gate, and before he got Ike, it definitely did have some issues getting to enemies and, you know, killing them in 1 round, stuff like that. He wasn't the greatest, he was just kind of fine, so I'm probably just going to put him in decent at the end of this. And I think it's also worth noting that his stats, his bases especially, are very similar to Lapis's, so they shouldn't be very far apart as far as I can tell. Like, the main difference between them, I think, is the personal class, and that's kind of about it. So for me, Diamant is like here, personally, but if I have to compensate for the fact that I did give him Ike when I didn't give him to anyone else, he's probably more like here for me right now, and he might even be a little bit worse than that. Next member that I have actually used is Ivy. Ivy is, first of all, really good utility, and then also potentially, if you give her the right resources, really good at combat. So I think she's very good for that reason, but very dependent on how many resources you're willing to give to her. So already from base, she comes with so much SP, you can pretty much give her whatever you want. One way to use her would be to give her the Lin emblem, or at least something like speed plus something, or speed taker, just to make sure she gets the doubling thresholds. And then once she doubles, she can annihilate magical enemies, or really anything you want to on player phase. And once she got the bulk to survive, she can fight on enemy phase as well. That's pretty good. How I use Ivy is more utility focused, and then it started to be more combat focused near the end. I had her, I don't remember what emblems I gave her for the most part. Maybe not even like any emblem rings, because she joins around the time you don't have any. So she has, let me think here. I don't remember what skill I gave her for. I think I put reposition, and I'm not sure about Canter. At some point she got Canter for sure. And Canter and reposition are just utility things. Anyone can do those things, but because Ivy is a flyer, at the very least you can do that. And that's basically what she was doing. She was healing people, she was killing armor knights, and she was repositioning and cantering around. And just being pretty useful for the most part, but not like stand out super good. Her luck is very low, so occasionally she'll be running like enemy crits. So she was good, but I wouldn't say she was my best unit. What made me convinced that she's actually really good was when I got put Micaiah on her. And then Micaiah enables, well, first of all, it enables all the staff shenanigans. I didn't use those a whole lot because hard mode doesn't really demand that you do that. So it was kind of fine not to do that. And but having the option is very good, of course. But that's more about Micaiah than Ivy. What specifically was good about Micaiah and Ivy was Nosferatu, because at that point, Ivy's offense was so good, and I had so many ways to fix her speed. I had like spare speed wings because no one else wanted them. I could rally through Byleth to get her speed better. And by rally, I mean instruct all. So that way, she could get over that little hurdle she has with doubling enemies. And when you double enemies with Nosferatu, there's a lot of situations where you just kill all the enemies and never die. It was almost like I was playing Awakening. I could kill like 5 Wyvern enemies in 1 turn, and Ivy would come out on top not taking any damage. And that's pretty rare. That was like, almost no one in my army was doing that. And even if they were like Diamant Ike or something like that. That's how Ivy worked. So for me personally, the way I was able to use Ivy, I put her in S, right? And I think she could stay there just because she has so much utility outside of it that I think it'd be almost universal. Like, I don't think you need Micaiah on her to be this good. But just the utility possibility alone and the huge amount of SP she comes with that makes that possible, it's pretty good. Like, it's really, really one of the best units in the game. And, I mean, yeah, she's weak to bows, sure, but her flexibility makes it so she never really has to be in range of an archer to be doing something useful in the first place. Like, if there's a ton around, you use a staff, or use a warp, or use a trap, or you heal someone, or you attack from long range and then canter out of the way. There's a lot of things she can do even when the enemy types are against her. There's no reason for her to be bad. That doesn't mean she's the best unit in the game, but she's definitely one of the better ones, I think. I could cut her down a little bit for availability reasons, because she does join later than a lot of people, but almost anyone who joins before her is worse in some way, so I still can see her staying up here. Again, just my impression. And this is based off of a unit that was kind of just doing utility for a lot of it, so I think that says a lot about how good I think she is. Then there's Kagetsu, and I think Kagetsu, I'm just going to straight up put him over Ivy right now, just put him in SM Flawless, because Kagetsu, I think, is the best stats in the game when you factor in availability, base stats, leveling speed, etc. So he can just do anything you want him to stat-wise. Weapon proficiencies are not a problem when you just invest some bond fragments to put him with someone else. Fun fact, I used Kagetsu like when he first joined, and then a little bit afterwards, then I benched him because I didn't have the deployment slots. And then when I benched Louise and Celine, I brought him back on the team, reclassed him to Wyvern Rider instead of Swordmaster, and he was still able to keep up with enemies somehow. Like, yeah, I had to give him some tonics or some rallies to make sure he hits doubling thresholds, but I was only able to do that because his other stats are so good that he was able to get away with doing those tasks in the first place. And from there, he did level up really well. I might have gotten a bit RNG blessed, but he seems really, really good. And this is also the general consensus, I think, around Kagetsu, is that he's, at least his bases are the best in the game, factoring in when he joins and what stats he's got against what the enemies have gotten. Just absolutely perfect. I don't know how we do as a Swordmaster. I feel like Swordmaster is not a very good class in this game. I think the other classes offer more options, and Wyvern has some of the best options. I mostly gave him, I want to say he ran with Leaf most of the time. I don't remember if I gave him anything else before that. It might have been Roy. But Leaf worked out well enough. You have to be a bit careful with Leaf because of the Master Lance problem, where he switches to Master Lance and gets doubled on enemy phase. But besides that, he was pretty fine. I think sometimes his luck was too low to get doubled, but that might also have been because I gave him a Killer Axe, which makes you more vulnerable to crits. So that might also have factored it in. But generally, Kagetsu was pretty reliable parts of my strategy. There's not a whole lot to say about just like a unit being a bundle of stats, but I did enjoy having him around. And the fact that he was so good for me, despite being benched for, I want to say like 7 chapters, not counting paralogs, I think that says a lot about how good he is as a unit. So I think he should stay in S. Zelkov, I kind of went into the whole Thief, Covert, Fog Machine strats with Yunaka, so I'm not going to repeat that too much. I think Zelkov is good, and better than Yunaka for sure. I'm just not sure if he belongs a whole tier higher. I don't think he does, but daggers are very helpful. I gave him Corn for most of it for the Fog Machine strats, and because of Hex and Torrential Roar, just setting up multiple debuffs on enemies is very powerful. So I'll throw him in A tier, and I'll throw him between the two. It's hard to judge Yunaka because I didn't use her after Zelkov joined, but I still put Yunaka in like the have-used part because I used her in every map before that she was around for. But I think Zelkov is better overall. There's no way you're gonna have more strength on Yunaka unless you gave her energy drops and you got lucky. And strength is important, even when you have like 30 more crit in a fog or whatever you have, whatever terrain you're on. Having more strength tends to be a more consistent way of doing damage than having a bit more crit, especially if you're doing very little damage in one hit. There might even be times when Yunaka's dealing 0 damage when Zelkov is done. That is a big difference when you're using daggers, because you need to do damage in order to poison people. That's the way I see it anyway. Pandreo is, I think, another unit that I used for a bit, then benched and then brought back later. Not in the same way that I did with Kagetsu, but I don't think I fielded him every single map since he was around. But he has been on my team for, at some point, like chapter, I don't know, 18-ish, 17-ish. I started using him every single chapter and I haven't really looked back. I've only used him as a High Priest. I think I was underusing what he could possibly do. I think as a Mage Knight, he might have performed better in battle. And there was a couple chapters where his lack of movement really stopped him from keeping up. But the staff utility he provides and the level of like bases he has, I think his bases are nearly on par with Kagetsu. And that says a lot. His ability is a bit worse, and he might be a bit less versatile in terms of classes. Although the staff utility is still really nice. I don't know how we do in a physical class either. I haven't looked into that. I kind of want to put him in S as well because his stats are so good, but maybe he's not S tier. I've heard people saying he's like the second coming of Pence, and for me, the reason he was unimpressive for me is the lack of movement keeping up with people, and I think he doesn't always double people, but that might also have been because I'm using a lot of Thunder on him and not always checking what he would double with like a Fire Tone. That's more on me. So, like I said, it was a flawed first playthrough. That's the whole fun of playing for the first time and not knowing what you're doing. I'll throw him in the high A for now, because I'm not sure if he belongs in S, but I know he's really, really good, and he's kind of close to like creeping in S for me. Marin, the Wolf Knights, the first time I used her, it's like the first silver dagger you get her, and I was immediately like super amazed by how good she is at fighting things. She doubles like everything. She's so fast. It was stupid. I don't even know if Wolf Knight is the best class for her. I've seen some people say she should get out of it, but for me, I just kept her in that class all the way through. And so for me, the challenge with Marin was just finding a way to two-shot enemies. And sometimes she would do that, and sometimes she wouldn't. For a while, I kept Lucina on her because I enjoyed having dual strikes with Lucina that would also poison the enemy. At some point, I switched to Roy to get a bigger strength buff. And once I did that, and I forged her dagger to +3, she was just two-shotting almost everything. And that's pretty damn good, especially because her bulk is also good enough, and she has a void to the point where some enemies would have really low hit rates on her. So just all around really reliable fighter on both enemy and player phase, useful to debuff bosses with the poison. Just doubling in general sets up kills for other units so easily. Nearly flawless unit basically, just, I mean, availability is a thing I guess, but other than that she's pretty much perfect. But I do wonder if she's maybe better off in other classes where she can still double, but has an easier time reaching two-shot thresholds without having to use Roy or like super heavy forges, because in hindsight, the Silver Dagger is a very expensive forge, and I could have used those materials for other things like killer weapons, like many more killer weapons. I definitely underutilized the forge in my playthrough for sure. I'll put Marin definitely below Pandreo, like not S tier, like not quite there, but the fact that you don't have to like invest in Marin to make her good, like even if you don't forge her dagger or give her strength stat boost somehow, she's still gonna be decent, whereas Chloe needs a lot of investment in the early game, which I think is a big difference between the two. So I like Marin more than Chloe just based on that. Alright, so Hortensia, I hate her voice, but sometimes you just have to field Hortensia because she's the best unit you haven't fielded yet. Her personal skill, again, one of the best in the game. It heals people from a slight distance, so you can mend at 2 range, for example, like the Fates Vestals, and that alone is very good. I've noticed she's very fragile, but again, just like with Ivy, the fact that she flies and can do things even if you're not in range of enemies means that it doesn't really inhibit it very much. You can heal someone, do some kind of teleportation stabs, shenanigans, and all that will work out. I've heard that Divine Pulse Plus is very good on both her and Ivy and other staff users because it works on Entrap and Freeze and Silence and stuff like that. So you can use that to compensate for like lackluster accuracy sometimes. Sometimes she can fight an Armor Knight. Her magic is not as good as Ivy, so she doesn't like two-shot everything, but sometimes I'd use it for chip damage, and that's pretty good. So unfortunately, sometimes I have to use Hortensia, and it was okay. But she is more fragile, so you have to watch out a little bit more, but her utility is fine. I'm not sure whether she goes at the bottom of A or the top of B, or maybe even above the Thieves. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of A for now. I don't like her, but sometimes you gotta use the good unit despite the fact you don't like them. Not a whole lot to say about her utility that I haven't really mentioned yet about like utility stabs. You all know how good those are. Probably good to use with Makai. I didn't ever give her an emblem ring, I think. Maybe like Celica once. But generally she's good without one. And that's, I guess that counts for something too. Cito, I mean, Cito's a dancer. Dancers are extremely good in this game, especially because you get him around the same time you can get Byleth from his paralog, and he's the best person to involve in a 4-way dance. So that way you can just get more dances on the same person. If you have like one person who's really good at boss killing, you can dance them with Cito after the attack, have him do it again, and then you can dance with the goddess to do it again. I guess you could also involve your boss killer in that dance to the goddess, but you could also involve both and get an extra attack in that way as well. It's really broken. The fact that you can just easily put Cantor or Cantor Plus on him is very nice. You get special dance. I think I got recommended to put Byleth's, what's the skill called again? It's like, it gives you more experience as you go along. I forgot what it's called. That's very nice to put on him right away so that he can get to special dance quicker, because Cito is not going to get a whole lot of experience off of doing things. He doesn't fight, but he does, you know, dance a lot. So basically every turn should be about how you make best use of Cito, because having your best action done twice or having a unit move twice is just so good. I have a whole video about why dancers are so busted, and Cito has some of the best traits of all those dancers. Being able to move again after attacking with Cantor is just insanely powerful on one of these units. Being able to get in and out of safety, or being able to reach units easily because he was able to reposition himself last turn, or being involved in a 4-way dance somewhere. It's all good. I don't recommend putting Byleth on him. I think it's better to have the Byleth user dance for him than having Byleth on the same person. I've seen that sometimes. I've seen people put like Sigurd on him. I don't recommend that either. You could put Boots on him if you wanted to, but generally I think that's still better on someone else. But yeah, Seedal, pretty damn good. Being able to like silence twice, restore twice, heal twice, attack twice, have your best unit move forward super deep into enemy territory, all those things are super great. So Seedal's an easy S for me. Maybe not the best unit in the game, because I still think those belong to like units that are doing the things that you're dancing for, but it's pretty close. I could see him over Ivy maybe. Last is Goldberry, another unit that I initially benched, and then when I benched some other people, I needed replacements, and I was like, well, Goldberry is pretty good, right? What I was told about Goldberry right away when I recruited her was that her defense is very high, but her starting class of hero is not very good to show that off. So I experimented with reclassing with her. I put her in, I think I ended up with Paladin because I noticed that Erica's engage attack does more damage on the cavalry units, and I just really wanted to put that on someone, but I didn't know who. So I was like, well, I'll just reclass Goldberry to Paladin, and then I'll have a way to just use Twin Strike for massive damage on enemies. And that's really what Goldberry did for me for most of the playthrough. I didn't really use her tanking abilities much because she doesn't double enemies back in the Paladin class, or probably any class. Like, she's not that fast. And so that was most of her role, just Twin Strike once, maybe twice, and that was kind of it. And otherwise, she's kind of hung back, did chip damage. I put reposition on her at some points just to help with that. Super nice. Definitely not the extent of Goldberry's ability. Like, the high bulk that she has in combination with, I think, some better stats than Louise in some areas was like, it really screamed that she's like lost potential, like wasted potential in a way. I think she's better than I gave her credit for, but she was still really good for me. I really liked her. So I'm gonna put her top of B for now, like decent. But not near flawless. She definitely has some issues. But again, I also benched her for like a significant portion of the game, because when you get Goldberry, like the chapter where you get Rosado and Erica Ring, I don't remember what chapter number that is, but I definitely started feeling her a little bit after that. Not as long as like between the joining and the benching and the reusing of Kagetsu, but kind of a long time. So I'm not quite sure about Goldberry, where to put her. I've heard some people say she goes great in Great Knight because it really accentuates her tanking abilities. Maybe like in general even, maybe that can work, I don't know. Goldberry is really fun. Alright, now let's get into the have not used category. These are units that, as it implies, I have not used. I think the proper term would probably be have not used as much, or haven't used long term. All these units I've probably had in like one round of combat at the very least, or fielded for one chapter when they were forced or when I had no better options. But at some point, it was time to pick units and they didn't make the cut. So that's why they're in this category. So for this, I'm less going off of my own experiences and also a little bit of like hearsay, like what I've heard other people do with these characters and what they can do, looking at their growth and basis a little bit. But my judgments here will not be very good. This is just what I think right now. And again, maybe later on we can revisit this and see, oh, I was kind of wrong about these actually. So let's go through them. Vander is the Jagan of the Engage game. He's good early on. Like, I thought he was really helpful early on for his bulk, and then at some point I decided, let's see if I can get away with stopping to field him so I can field more auto units instead, and it worked out pretty well. I think it was around chapter 9 or 10 or so, but up to that point he was pretty solid, and then after that he just kind of fell off. I don't think his long term is very good. His growth seemed fine. I think the main problem is just he has less levels to grow to, and then if people end up matching his level, then they end up having far superior stats. And he's not so superior to others in the beginning that you need to keep feeding him like boss kills or something like that. He's no Seth, he's no Marcus, he's probably most like FE6 Marcus in that regard, or maybe even Awakening Frederick, but without the good long-term potential. So I think we can give him credit for his early game help, like if you're playing on Manding mode especially. I imagine that Vander early on is quite crucial, so for that I can probably put him like in the B tier, in a decent part, but you know, the game is still like 15 chapters after, you should probably bench him, plus all the emblem paralogs as well, which is a very big amount of time to just not exist, or just be a bot that doesn't rely on stats like a Byleth Dancer. That's what I feel about Vander. Maybe he's a little bit better than that. Maybe he can be overstating or something, but I don't think he would change very much. And some people might even put him like usable instead. This is just me giving him credit for the early game, because the early game I do think is quite tough, so it's good to credit him a little bit for that. Clan. I'm probably going to mispronounce his name a couple times, or, you know, verbally typo it, call him Clamp or clan or clam, or one of these is probably correct. Anyway, early game mage, I think overall not the best long-term potential. I think almost everyone I know benched him, but I've seen like 1 or 2 people use him as a mage knight long-term with some success, but I wasn't one of those people. He's probably fine. I noticed that his magic isn't exactly the highest. In fact, if you were to reclass him into a physical class, he has better strength than magic, at least when it comes to growth. I think his bases are tied. So that could be one interesting way to try and make him a little bit better, but it's probably still not worth it. And early on, seals are at a premium, both second seals and master seals. So I don't know how viable that is. And overall, I pretty comfortably put him in C tier. But early on, I do think it's nice to have a mage that can hit armor knights. The armor knights in this game, especially early on, are so tough. You don't have many ways to just break through them, no pun intended. So magic is very helpful there. So he's nice for that, but other than that, I don't think he adds a whole lot. Not sure whether he's better or worse than Etier. I like Etier a lot, obviously, but I do think the flyer utility, like the flyer killing utility, and the covert class options, and all the dual strikes also count for something. So that's why right now I'm leaning towards him lower, but I don't think it matters very much. Fram is utility, like all utility, and then the fist pumping, I guess, is pretty good. Like killing enemies with fist is very fun, but even on hard, I noticed it was very hard to set up kills for her if I wanted to, because she was literally doing 0 damage. I would need to have like a Leer next to her just to, because her damage would be set to 0, and then you put a Leer next to her and it gets +3, so it actually ends up being 3 damage per hit, I think, which is, that's one way to boost it, right? But generally it's just heal and chain guard. I didn't use chain guard as much as I probably should. I found that because I didn't know the enemy attacking order, it was usually safer to find a plan where a heal would get the job done instead, but you can go many ways with this. Now, it's possible that I'm undervaluing this utility and that it actually extends beyond the early game. It's possible that, for example, by putting Micaiah on her, you can extend her longevity, but generally I didn't find Fram to be super useful, and just the cheat up utility alone wasn't enough to keep her around for me. And if I was going to do that long term, I think Jean is probably better at that overall. I think his spaces are slightly better, and his growths, thanks to his personal, probably better. So that's why I would also lean towards her in the C tier. But maybe she's probably better than these, because her utility works regardless of stats, so you don't have to like invest into her to make her work. She doesn't also like require kill XP, so you can just heal people or chain guard to get XP, right? So in that way, she probably fits on a team a bit easier and allows you to feed more XP to other units while providing all the utility that she does. So she's probably better than these units, probably. Alfred, I think, is the unit that most people were very disappointed on, and then he has like a couple of really ardent defenders who insist he's actually not that bad, which I can see. Personally, my experience with him wasn't very good. I was noticing he was getting doubled quite a bit more than I would have liked. Like early on, he has some of the worst stats of the frontline units, and then he has like one more move, and the one more move just didn't feel like it was worth it, especially because I think terrain affects a little bit more heavily as well. So I was kind of disappointed in my cav, bro. I was like, wait, why did you give me forward, but in engage instead? Wasn't very happy with that. His personal didn't help a whole lot, because I usually, if things are like tight with enemies, if you need a lot of actions, then you can't really use his personal to just get +2 defense. So I was like, yeah, that's not very good, or whatever it is that he gets. I think it's strength, actually. Defense might be someone else. Anyway, I guess he can be fine. I've seen some people say like, yeah, if you give him Sigurd and then you give him like some stat boosters, he uses those resources the best and becomes quite a bit better. But I think for most people, they either let him die or they bench him at some point. So I'm going to preemptively throw him in C tier, a little bit below Fram. I think is probably fine. He's not irredeemable. Like, no one is irredeemable in this game. There's probably ways to make him work, but I think it takes more work than these units, or in the case of Vander, he provides more utility that makes it worth. Boucheron is very funny. Probably the character that causes the most amount of confirmation bias among people. Like, the amount of comments on my video about the RNG and people complaining about people missing dual strikes and that the RNG cannot possibly be the way I describe it is because they've seen too many misses. I feel like half of that is probably Boucheron doing all that work, because I think he's the only chain attacker, one of the very few you have in the early game. I know for the very early on, he's literally the only one, which makes his personal not work, which, side note, is also very funny and very stupid. But yeah, he doesn't leave the best first impressions at all. I think he can miss a lot. I believe his personal strength growth is also kind of garbage, which doesn't help with his longevity either. But that said, I've also seen people make him work, and I think Pavis uses Ike on Boucheron, for example, and that makes him durable because that's what Ike does, and suddenly he looks a whole lot better. But I didn't use him long term. I used him in the early game to, kill a couple goons here and there, do some dual strikes, or what should I call them? Chain attacks, probably. Chain attacks is the proper term. He's fine, but I didn't really get a very good impression of him. And I mean, sure, he can technically be a warrior, and warrior is a very good class. Chain attacking is a very powerful tool. You can make him a hero. You can make use of his personal somehow. But I think almost anyone can do that, especially later in the game. So I don't count that as super high utility. Like, this character can be a warrior. It's kind of whatever to me, unless they have something special going on with it, which I guess in his case would be his personal. But for me, personally, I think it's more important to have something like Etier's bow affinity. But I don't know. Again, I could be wrong on this. Is just snap judgments, right? Based on a very short amount of time of fielding. I think I benched him probably around chapter 7 or 8 or so. So we'll throw him, like, I don't know, above Clan. Jean, talked about him a little bit before, has similar utility to Fram. I think it's fun to have two key adepts because they can heal each other. So after you chain guard, you can then spend one turn to heal that chain guard damage you took, and then you can use the other one to chain guard or something like that. You can do a couple more things when you have two compared to when you only have one healer. It's just really nice to be able to heal your healer, especially when chain guarding also takes HP off of them. So I think that's nice. I know he has a lot of potential because his personal skill doubles his class growth, which can mean like up to like a 40% boost in some kind of stats, depending on what your class growth, like what class you do. I know Kirby Master talked about like using like General Jean to get a massive defense growth. Obviously, it takes time to catch up, but the cool thing about a character like this, we've had people before in Fire Emblem that join very on level, but then they catch up through getting kills. People like Donald, people like Mozu, and those are fun, but it can be really difficult to set up kills for those units. But for Jean, you don't have to because he just heals and gets XP instead. So that makes it a lot easier. But you can still do the thing where you like lower an enemy to 1 HP and you finish him off with Jean to get a buttload of XP if you want to. But he seems like a very fun unit to use and definitely want to try him out. But I don't think he's very good. I mean, you could probably put him over a couple people here. I think he's better than Fram long term. I don't know if that outweighs Fram's utility in the first 6 chapters, though. I don't think it does personally. I'll throw him here for now. As you can tell, I'm not a very big fan of Clan. It doesn't help that Clan's a lot of competition in the mage department. Speaking of mage department, Anna, well, I think she might not go over Clan. I think Anna is one of the worst units in the game. Still usable, and I love that they gave her a special bit of utility within her personal skill that activates whenever she kills someone. Rather, it activates luck percent of the time. Whenever she kills someone, she gets some gold for you. In the economy of Fire Emblem Engage, if you're playing blind, I can perfectly understand being broke and being tempted to use Anna, but I think the investment is just making it harder on you than you want to. Especially because Anna herself is just so terrible at combat, and her activation rate is so low. A friend of mine, Zetetic, said he plays the game with using only Annas. With I think they all have her personal, and within the first 8 chapters or so, I think he said the personal proc like 3 times or something, which is so low. So I don't remember how much gold it gives, but let's say it's 500. That's like 1.5k for putting up with all Annas, which is amazing. Low luck also just means she can get crit if you fight the enemy. And other than that, she has like a bunch of other drawbacks. Like she joins in that paralog, and then in order for her to, you know, have some availability, you have to do that paralog early, which might not be what you want if you prefer to save it for later, which has some advantages as well, like making it easier to get some XP on units in a way described in another video by Choops, or Choosy, whatever you want to call him, Chaz. So lots of different ways to go about that paralog. And then in addition, Anna has to like spend some time in Brigands to get to level 10, and then she can promote or reclass and then get to a mage tree. And that's when she starts popping off. And by popping off, I mean you still have to feed her some kills because you're probably still kind of bad. But at least then she gets her like, what is it, 55, 60 magic growth. And then you start accumulating kills and, you know, being an actually good unit rather than a dead weight. I understand the frustration with Engage's economy, especially going in blind. It can be very easy to go broke if you donate to the wrong countries or you donate too much. I get it. It kind of tricks you, but I think Anna will overall make your experience more of a pain than anything else. So I think she's the worst unit that we've tiered so far, and possibly one of the worst units in the game, but still usable. And I love that they gave us, like, there's a reward for putting up with it. So I think that's still pretty cool. Alchrist is a unit that I've seen a lot of people praise. I haven't ever tried him myself beyond the first couple chapters, but I know he's really good at what he does, which apparently is just being an archer and maybe being with Lyn. He gets a personal class and promotion that's kind of like a sniper, but it's covert, just like sniper is. But then he gets Luna, and that's a really good skill. And I believe his skill cap is also like 40, is what I've been told. So he has a lot better activation rate than poor Diamant, who's stuck with like 22 dex cap. So he can activate Luna quite a lot. Something I've heard people praise him for is that he would like activate Luna on Armor Knights, and then when he does, he can do it like during an Astral Storm, and he can do it in any hit. So at any time he can just like ignore their defenses or pierce through it and do quite a bit more damage than he should. Like the game can say you're doing 0 damage and he just ends up with 1 on a kill, which I think is very funny at the very least. Like if it's not good, then at the very least it's funny. And on top of that, I mean, Covert is just a good subclass to be in, but he can also be in other classes if you want him to, I guess. I just think Luna is a standout trait, so I'm gonna base most of my ratings based on that. But, you know, just having access to bows is pretty nice as well. Probably has a lot of the same pros that Etier did for me. Like, you could probably make him a warrior and be pretty good with that too. I'm gonna throw him... He's above Diamant for sure, and I reckon he might even be A. Yeah, he could be. I could see him in A. I don't know if he's better than Hortensia or Runaka. I'll throw him here. I don't know, though. This is just based off of people praising him, but people praising him are going to love him a little bit more than average, right? So maybe I'm overrating him a little bit. This is just what I'm getting from other people. Lapis is basically the same unit as Diamant base stats-wise, and I only tried her for like 1 or 2 chapters before I benched her. The same goes for Alchemist, by the way, if you're wondering, because, you know, unit space is an issue. But, you know, Lapis is not bad. It's just there's probably a lot more units that can perform the same or better with the same investments. You know, backup units are fine, but not standout, and anyone can be one, so don't really care. For me, she was like a walking tutorial for the smash mechanic, which I'd never really make use of it throughout the playthrough, unlike in very rare circumstances. So Lapis was okay, I guess. I'll put her like the same height as Diamant, roughly speaking, and then I'll fix my overlay. And then we have Citrine, and Citrine, when I first saw, what's-her-face, Saline, I thought she'd be like the lean out this game with like really high magic and low speed. It turned out that was more like Citrine. Citrine is a nuke mage, apparently, and that can make her very fun. I do like her in theory, I just haven't tried her at all beyond like maybe 1 or 2 chapters, but she seems really good. I know some people have been trying to make builds with her where they give her a lot of magic stack damage, and then give her like Thoron or a Force Thoron and Vantage, and then try to just one-shot enemies, which I think is a strategy that works successfully in Fates. I'm not sure how good it is in this game, but I've seen some people say they can reach the threshold, so maybe it works. I mean, that's a really good late game build to just get enemies phase sweeps going, something that's a little rare in this game. Usually it's more player phase focused, so I'm glad she can do that, or that she can potentially do that. But I'm not sure if that's all she can do or if there's more to it. But she just seems like a good mage, on par with or better than Saline. I'll put her over Saline for now. I do think she's significantly better than Clan, at least. But that's really all I know about her. She seems good. Maybe even a little bit better than this. Maybe like over here somewhere. Maybe she should be over Diamant and Lapis. I don't know though. Amber, only used him in his joining chapter. I made my preparations without knowing he was going to be there, and he just appeared and changed everything a little bit. I was like, oh, who's this alpaca goofball? And he's like right near some enemies where you can test him out. He has like a killer lance. He does okay against them. You can like fight him on enemy phase, do a little bit of work. For me, I think he missed 1 attack, and that was when I realized I'm not using this unit. But also just he's doing shit at a time where I have so many units already that it's kind of hard to make room for more people. But I know from others that Amber is not bad. You can like insta promote him and have him do some work. I know Raisins used him, I forgot as what. Oh, I think Link said to me he used him as a halberdier. He like promoted him, reclassed to halberdier, and then may use the personal skill to just double everything because apparently strength is really good. That seems like good utility, so I'm not going to throw him in C tier just yet. I'll throw him in like B tier. Not sure if he's better or worse than Vander. I do think the insta promote strat for him has value in theory, but I also remember around that time that Master Seals were really rare, so I'm not sure if it's justifiable to use it on him when you have like so many other units waiting for promotion. Like, that's not something you just get for free without anyone going like, hey, are you sure you want to invest that into that unit? But, you know, I can see it being good. Jade, as far as I can tell, was just kind of Louise with the similar issues, but joins later. I didn't use her, but again, she can like insta-promote or almost insta-promote, I think, and be fine. I know her personal skills, like if you wait to get res, which is kind of cringe at that point, and you know, armored units are fine, I guess. She's probably useful for something. I say like armored units are fine. Almost anyone can reclass to almost anything with some amount of investment, so it's not even that big of a pro. It's more like these units just kind of represent these classes when they start out, and then you can reclass them if you think those initial classes aren't very good. Yeah, I don't know. I'm tempted to throw her in like C because she doesn't have that period of time where she's like Louise, where Louise is really, really good, whereas Amber or Jade is never that good. So maybe around here somewhere. I'm not sure though. Maybe she's actually good. Maybe I'm wrong. Pogato or Fogato, whatever you want to call him. I like Pogato. I just invented that. I'm very smart. He's kind of like a nomad trooper kind of guy. And from what I can tell, he has a personal class that's kind of holding him back stat-wise. But if you change to warrior, for example, he gets a bunch of strength, but he keeps his really good speed. And so you have a unit that can double and do a lot of damage. So either you do that to boost his strength, or you can use the radiant bow, which I've been underutilizing a lot, and I probably would like to use more in my next playthrough. And apparently the radiant bow is also super good to make him do a lot of damage because it goes off magic, which for him is decent. So he can kill like armor knights, or maybe use like a brave bow to quadruple some enemies. There's a lot of ways to make him good probably. So he seems like a decently low investment, high return unit. So I'm gonna throw him somewhere. I think it could be A tier, honestly speaking. If I'm putting like low availability units like quote unquote low availability units like Hortensia and Marin and Pandreo in there, I can definitely throw him in there. I'll throw him here. I'm not sure exactly where he goes because I haven't used him, but he seems really good, so I'd like to try him out. But maybe I'm overrating him a bit. Then we have Brunette, who I got a pretty good first impression from because I was like, whoa, I get this guy for free and has 20 defense. That's pretty solid. And then everyone else told me it was not that good. Apparently his personal bases aren't that good, and the defense he does have is mostly from the Great Net class. And turns out that's kind of a bummer because that means that people with better stats can replicate his utility. So I'll probably end up throwing him in C tier. But again, there's much worse units in the franchise that you could be using. But I'll throw him in C tier, probably, because he doesn't seem very good personal stat-wise. But I only used him for one chapter, so I can't really say a whole lot about it. Kind of a funny unit, though. Toss him, like, I don't know, here. Tamara is also a unit that I was talking to Peeved one day, and they were like, yeah, she's probably bottom 3 units in the whole game. Not sure if that's true, but she doesn't have the best first impression. She comes with Ike, right? So when you use her, it's partial like, oh, this is really good. But then you realize, well, Ike makes anyone really good. And Tamara has some issues. The main one being that she gets weighed down by every lance under the sun. So her speed never gets to pop off. And she doesn't really do anything else spectacularly. Another unit I only used for one chapter and then benched. To make her like the best possible. I think you can like insta promote her. But again, you're kind of short on Master Seals at the time. I remember at that point I promoted my Louise instead. Not sure in hindsight if that was the best idea, but it turns out Tamara was not very good. I'm definitely going to throw her over Anna, but I don't know if I put her over Clan, even considering the early game utility. But I only know her stats are kind of bad, especially her build and her strength. But beyond that, I don't know how good she is. Panette, on the other hand, very different kind of unit. I think mostly reminiscent of like Gonzalez from FP6 in that she has a lot of HP and a lot of strength, and I think decent enough speed to get some doubling done here and there, but mostly relies on crits and one-hit KOs. But for me, she did that quite well. I only used her for a couple chapters when I had extra deployment slots, and I was pretty happy with what she did. She did end up dying a lot because in order to make use of what she was offering, I had to put her in enemy range, and the joining chapters that she's in, there's a lot of fog of war, and that means she can get surprised and like wrecked by a lot of enemies. So it went wrong a couple times, but I'm sure if you use her right, she has the right stats to just obliterate anything. Particularly killing bosses must be pretty fun with her. Making like high crit builds, getting like Wrath in there to get high, like 100% crit possibly. That all seems quite good. When you have really high HP, you can also stack defense on someone to make them more durable. So I'm sure if you throw Ike on her, that can also be really good. So definitely a unit I want to use in my next playthrough. Gonna throw her in A. Not sure exactly where in A. I guess like better than Fogato for now, but I'm really not sure. Rosado, he joins as one of the last units on here. In fact, I mean, you can see them almost out of units. Rosado joins with the Erica emblem, and so I kind of linked that to him, and then I benched him, so that the only chapter I used him in is when he has the Erica emblem, which kind of skews his combat performance a bit. I don't remember exactly what was wrong with him. I think he doesn't quite double everything, but his starting class is so good. But it's also a class that anyone can become. So it's hard to isolate Rosado from innate traits that he's not guaranteed to have, if that makes any sense. He's probably fine, but I don't know exactly how good, so I'm just going to throw him at the bottom of B and hope I'm correct. He might be a C instead, though. He seems usable at the very least at base. Lyndon was a fun surprise. I think I fielded him... there might have been a chapter where I deployed him, but I think I might have only used him in the chapter where he joined. And he has staff utility, and you can use Thoron, and that's kind of about it. I don't really have a lot else to say about him, because I didn't use him for more like a couple of turns. But considering I almost never see anyone talk about how good or how bad he is, I'm just going to throw him at C, somewhere like a free utility kind of guy, and hope I'm correct. Kind of the same goes for Saphir. She seems underwhelming, to say the least, but probably usable. Like, I think her strength is kind of good, so probably underrating her. I'll throw her like around Brunette's high. I don't know. She seems fine, but again, I haven't really given her much of a chance to shine, did I? Well, that is my tier list. As you can tell by the end, I had less and less experience with these units as it went on, but that's the point of a first impression list. We're now done with the spoiler-free territory, but there are a couple characters left that I want to show on here, but I didn't want to just pop them into your face at the start of the video and accidentally spoil people who are even slower at beating the game than me. So I'm going to add them now. We'll talk about them for a little bit, and then we'll reach our final conclusions. Right, so it's chapter 20-something, and you get one new unit one chapter and one new unit the next chapter. You get Mauvir, and the next chapter you get Vale. I found Mauvir pretty fine for some units, like for some purposes. You don't get many units at this point in the game that can really keep up with the enemies, even in hard mode. So it was nice to just have Mauvir as a person to fill unit slot and do things with. Very different from the mid game where there's a lot of competition instead. I did do a whole lot for me, but when you have a staff rank and the ability to use like a physic or a restore, that's kind of all you need to be somewhat useful. You could take a couple hits, you know, do some beatings, uses like 2,500 SP, or I think that's his base, to just get some good skills like, I don't know, Cantor or something, and just be good like that. You can probably give him some kind of emblem ring, like, I don't know, Micaiah, and he'd be able to do some work with it, but I don't know. He seems fine, but not particularly spectacular. I'll throw him like around Lyndon's height. He might be better than that. I don't know, but he seems fine to deploy at least. Like, he might be a little bit higher than that. And then I have Vale over here, and I think Vale is useful. Like, having another unit with the dragon properties that Alir is the only one who had them so far. It's really nice. I threw Byleth on her the moment I got her, basically. And that gave me access to Dance of the Goddess and basically Rally Spectrum, so that Alir could do other things, like be engaged with Marth or use this late game super engage that you get later. So that was kind of a nice little bit of like substitute, like a bit of extra utility that I didn't expect to have at that point in the game. So for the time I had her, I would say Vale was probably a B tier or even an A tier. But of course, because she's the least available unit, I have to dock some points, just like with Mauvir. So probably would put her like over Rosado and Vander or something. And Amber probably, yeah, something like around here somewhere is where I probably put Vale overall. I do think her utility was very good, but you can get the Byleth utility out of almost anyone, and even the other rallies are kind of good. So it's hard to evaluate how good she is. This also comes back to my unfamiliarity with the other things that dragons can do with their extra things. Like all the little weird bonuses they get from their engage rings. So that's how I judge that, but again, it's probably highly inaccurate, and let me know if something is wrong here so I cannot fix it. Alternatively, I'll just play this game a bunch more because it's really fun, and we'll see how judgments change from here. But this is the first of probably many tier lists that I'll make on this game. Generally speaking, pretty happy with how it looks right now. Some things look like they could be wrong in the future, but I'm not confident either way. But there you go. Let me know in the comments how wrong I am. Bye!